Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Weddings are supposed to be the one day where everything revolves around you. The bride, the woman in white, the center of every camera flash, every whispered compliment, every champagne toast. But somehow, standing there under the amber glow of string lights in a venue that smelled like roses and overpriced linen, I felt like an extra in my own movie. The music had just quieted. Forks were clinking against glasses, and then came that telltale sound of a mic squealing slightly before someone clears their throat and takes command of the room. My cousin Lisa, older by 3 years and still somehow clinging to the peak she hit in high school, raised her glass with a gleam in her eye that I now know wasn't warmth or pride. It was set up. A perfect layup to a punchline she'd been waiting years to say. "To my beautiful cousin," she began, with that sing-song, sugary voice that always sounded like a thin veil over something much colder. We all know she was the last to be picked for anything. And just like that, the laughter rolled in like a goddamn tide. It started in waves, some scattered chuckles from our old friends from school, the groomsmen elbowing each other like frat boys at a bar, and worst of all, my own mother choking on her Prosecco while snorting like she hadn't just clapped at her own daughter's public shaming. I felt it like a slap, hot, sharp, sudden. But I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I smiled, wide enough for photos, but my eyes did something else entirely. They locked on Lisa's, steady and dry, and I knew, this wasn't just some off-color joke. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being the sidekick, the backup plan, the plus one to someone else's spotlight. And Lisa? She'd just crowned herself prom queen of my wedding reception. I looked at my husband, Tim, God bless him, and he gave me the kind of helpless smile men give when they've wandered into a minefield and realized too late they're wearing tap shoes. He didn't know the history. He thought Lisa was funny. He thought our relationship was one of friendly teasing and harmless jabs. But Lisa had always been the one who tossed the match just to watch me sweat trying to put the fire out. Growing up, it was Lisa who told me I'd peaked in middle school when I got braces and acne in the same week. It was Lisa who told the camp counselor that I was scared of sleeping alone in the dark, which wasn't true, but it got me bunked with the girls who stole my socks and poured shampoo in my shoes. It was Lisa who convinced my first crush to ask me out, only for him to bail 20 minutes before the movie and then take her instead. And every time, every single goddamn time, she'd grin and say something like, "Don't take it so personally, sweetie. You're just a little late to the game." So when that line hit, the last to be picked for anything, it wasn't just a joke. It was a thesis statement. And I stood there, holding my wine glass, nodding along like I hadn't just had my entire childhood distilled into a single, cruel laugh line. The rest of the night blurred together. Speeches continued. My father muttered something half-hearted about being proud. My mother asked the DJ to play Dancing Queen, because of course she did. I posed for photos with relatives who hadn't texted me in years, all of them drunk on open-bar generosity and shallow smiles. Lisa made her rounds, hugging people, acting like she hadn't just gutted me in front of 100 people. I caught her and Mom giggling at one point, laughing like it was all in good fun. Like my face wasn't plastered on every screen in the room as the woman who just took a punch and smiled anyway. But I didn't break. That's not how I work. Because what no one in that room knew, not Tim, not my mother, not Lisa with her sharp tongue and fake tan, was that every flower, every napkin, every goddamn chair in that venue was there because someone else believed in me. Someone they'd all forgotten. Someone they pretended never existed. So I smiled for the rest of the night. I let the photographer catch my good side. I kissed my husband and thanked the guests and even hugged Lisa when she left, her perfume clogging my throat like dust in an old attic. And as I stood alone by the fountain, heels in hand, listening to the distant beat of the last dance thumping through the wooden floorboards, I whispered, just for me, I hope they enjoyed that moment. It's the last laugh they'll get. There's a kind of invisibility that doesn't come from hiding but from being too reliable, too easy to overlook, The kind of presence that's just expected but never celebrated, like wallpaper or air conditioning or background music in a waiting room. Comforting, familiar, but never the reason anyone shows up. I've been that my entire life. From as far back as I can remember, I was the kid who didn't cry too loud, who cleaned up without being asked, who got straight B's without needing tutors or praise. I wasn't the problem child, but I wasn't the special one either. I was safe. And safe never got a spotlight. Lisa, of course, was the opposite. She was the drama, the volume, the beautiful mess that pulled everyone's attention like a magnet drags metal shavings. When she got suspended for throwing a stapler in 6th grade, my mom cried for hours, then baked her cookies. When I won 2nd place in the regional spelling bee, I got a lukewarm, "That's nice, honey," and a reminder to keep my room clean. And that was the pattern, always. Lisa got attention for the storms she made. I got ignored for holding the umbrella. People always said I was the good girl, but what they really meant was easy to forget. I never made noise, never caused problems, never gave anyone a reason to raise their voice or their hopes. But the thing no one tells you is that being good isn't always enough. Sometimes it feels like you could set yourself on fire in the middle of the living room and no one would look up from their phone. It wasn't just at home, it followed me everywhere. Teachers praised my neat handwriting, never my ideas. Friends invited me to their birthday parties, but I was always the one sitting at the end of the table, holding someone's coat or taking the group photo because no one thought to include me in it. Dating was a whole other thing. I didn't even realize I was the safe choice until I was 23, sitting across from a guy named Jeremy who told me, straight-faced, "You're not the kind of girl guys chase, but you're the kind they marry." He said it like it was a compliment. I smiled like it didn't feel like a slap. Most of the men I dated were like that, polite, dependable, and vaguely bored. I was the maybe someday girlfriend. Never the I had to have you the moment I saw you kind of woman. I watched men fall head over heels for my friends, lose their damn minds over women who ghosted them, but when they looked at me, they saw stability. They saw potential. They saw what they needed, eventually. When I met Tim, I thought maybe things had changed. He was kind, steady, loved dogs, and paid his bills on time. He didn't sweep me off my feet, but he did pull out my chair and remembered how I took my coffee. It was enough. It had to be. Love, I'd decided by then, was not something fiery or sudden for people like me. It was built, carefully and patiently, like IKEA furniture, frustrating at times, but it held weight if you assembled it right. When we got engaged, people were happy for us, of course, but there was always this underlying assumption that he'd picked me because he was finally ready to settle down, not because he couldn't live without me. That difference matters. Lisa said something once, offhand, like she wasn't aware it would echo in my head for months. "Tim's a solid guy. You're lucky he sees your worth." My worth. Like it wasn't visible unless someone else put a sticker on it. And then came the wedding. The Pinterest boards, the tastings, the endless back and forth with vendors and florists and chair rental places. Everyone assumed Tim was footing the bill, or maybe our parents. The truth? We had over 600 people at the wedding, probably closer to 300. I mean, you see how that sounds, right? But no one questioned the cost. No one thought to ask who wrote the checks. That's what being invisible gets you, assumptions instead of questions. I never corrected them. Why would I? Let them believe what they wanted. I had my reasons. I had my secrets. And I had something none of them expected. Because I didn't pay for a single thing. Not the venue, not the caterer, not the napkins with the gold foil initials. And neither did Tim. But someone did. Someone they all forgot. Someone they never even saw coming. The thing about secrets is they gain weight over time. Not like bricks dropped on your shoulders all at once, but like a constant drip that slowly fills the room until you're chest deep and pretending you're not drowning. When people looked at our wedding, at the high ceilings draped in gauze and fairy lights, the catered filet mignon, the jazz trio playing Sinatra in the corner like we were born with champagne in our veins, they didn't think to ask how it was all possible. They assumed, like they always do, that someone else took care of it. Some generous parent. Some successful fiancé. That's what they always assume with women like me, pretty enough to look expensive, quiet enough not to challenge it. But weddings are expensive, and memory-making is a brutal business when you're trying to prove something, not to the world, but to yourself. I didn't want the day to feel like a performance, though I suppose it was. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted every rose petal and tablecloth and glass of overpriced Cabernet to whisper one thing: I was never as small as you made me feel. Still, no one asked. Not even Tim. He just smiled and said things like, "You're amazing. I don't know how you pulled this off," and I'd kiss him and nod and let him believe it. I don't think he could have handled the real answer, even if I wanted to give it. The truth is, the real planning started years ago, not months before the wedding, not with Pinterest boards or spreadsheets, but with a man sitting across from me in a coffee shop on a gray afternoon when everything in my life felt like it had turned to static. I hadn't seen him in over 5 years, not since my brother's funeral, not since the day my mother slammed the door in his face and told him he wasn't welcome anymore. His name was Mason. And the moment I saw him, still tall, still guarded behind those tired eyes, I remembered every moment we'd ever shared without trying. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just slid a folder across the table, like we were meeting for a business deal instead of a long-overdue reunion. Inside was a list: venues, prices, planners, vendors, all itemized and ready to go. And at the bottom, in small, neat print, one line: "I told your brother I'd take care of you." I stared at that sentence like it was written in another language. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to ask him what he wanted in return. But all I said was, "Why now?" He looked me in the eye, really looked, the way no one had since I was maybe 17, and said, "Because they still don't see you." But I do. People tried to guess, of course. When they saw the scale of the wedding, the clean precision of everything falling perfectly into place, the rumors started flying. My boss? Too cheap. A sugar daddy? Please. A secret lottery win? I wish. But no one guessed the truth because they'd all forgotten Mason even existed. Or maybe they just pretended to. He didn't fit their version of my life. He didn't belong in their picture of who I was supposed to be. I never corrected them. I never told Tim. Not because I was ashamed, but because some truths don't belong to everyone. Some truths are quiet, sacred, stored away like love letters you never mail but read every few years when you need to remember who you were before the world dulled you down. Mason never asked for anything in return. He didn't try to take credit, didn't ask to be acknowledged, didn't even RSVP to the wedding until the week before. And when he did, it was with a single text: "I'll be there. Save me a seat near the back." But when he walked in black tux, folder in hand, late enough to turn heads, but early enough to make a statement, the room went dead silent. There are people in your life who show up not when things are good and polished and camera-ready, but when the floor's still cold from crying and the world smells like regret. Mason was that person for me, the one who never tried to fix me, never asked me to be someone shinier or easier to digest. He just was solid, unflinching, exactly what I needed without ever once making me feel like I owed him for it. And long before the tux and the folder and the stunned silence of my wedding night, there was a girl in her brother's shadow, half-formed and overlooked, and there was Mason, sitting next to her on the porch steps, handing her a warm soda and letting her be mad at the world without offering a damn thing but space. He was my brother's best friend, the kind that really meant it, the kind that covered for him when he came home drunk, that dragged him out of fights he shouldn't have started, that stood in the front row of every graduation and football game like he belonged there. And for a while, he did belong. Our parents didn't love that he was rough around the edges, didn't love the tattoos or the sharp way he talked when he was angry, but he was always kind to me. He was the only person who treated me like I wasn't invisible, like I was more than someone's little sister with her nose in a book and her words stuck in her throat. Then my brother died. A motorcycle crash on a highway nobody even liked to drive. The kind of death that comes with no warning, no dramatic last words, just a phone call and a silence that swallows everything after it. And in the weeks that followed, while the casseroles piled up and my mother cried into her rosary beads and Lisa made it all about her grief, Mason came by every day. Every single day. He sat in the living room like it still belonged to him. He took out the trash without being asked, and he never once told me to stay strong or move on. He just listened, which, back then, was more than anyone else seemed willing to do. But grief is cruel and petty, and it makes people look for something to blame. My parents turned on him fast, saying he was a bad influence, that if he hadn't been around so much, maybe my brother would have made better choices. They threw him out of the funeral halfway through the eulogy. They told him to disappear, and he did because he respected their grief even when it crushed him. And just like that, he was gone. No calls, no visits, no late-night porch talks. Just silence. But I never forgot him. Not once. Years passed. Life trudged on like it always does, and I did what I was supposed to. I went to college, I got a job, I dated men who all blurred together into a series of polite, forgettable dinners. And through it all, Mason was a ghost in the margins, never visible, never completely gone. I didn't hear from him for nearly 6 years. And then, out of nowhere, he found me. I don't know how, and I never asked. He looked different when we met again in that coffee shop, sharper around the edges, like someone who'd figured out how to wear his pain without apology. He told me he'd built something, his own company, his own version of success, and that he never stopped thinking about me. Not in some romantic, fairy tale way, but in the way someone thinks about the only person who ever looked at them without flinching, the only person who remembered them when it mattered. He told me he wanted to help with the wedding, that he'd already looked into things, quietly, behind the scenes. That if I wanted, he'd handle everything. The venue, the planner, the bill, all of it. I asked him why. He didn't smile. He just said, because it's time they saw who you really are. But there was one condition. He said he'd stay in the background, keep it all anonymous, let everyone believe what they wanted. But he asked for one thing in return, that he could come to the wedding. That he'd show up, not as a guest, but as something else entirely. I asked him what that meant. He handed me a sealed folder and said, "You'll know when I walk in." And so when he did, when Mason entered the room wearing a black tuxedo that fit like armor, holding the very same folder he'd handed me years ago, the laughter died in people's throats. The air shifted. Lisa's face fell like a stone dropped in water. My mother blinked like she was seeing a ghost. And Mason didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't nod to anyone. Because the folder wasn't a speech. It was a declaration. There are moments that split time into before and after, and the second Mason stepped up to the microphone, clearing his throat in the same casual, grounded way he used to when talking late into the night under porch lights, I knew we were living in the after. Everything that had come before, Lisa's jab, my mother's laughter, the soft betrayals wrapped in smiles and wine glasses, all of it faded into a silence so thick it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. He didn't smile. He didn't adjust the mic stand or look for permission. He just opened the folder, the one everyone in the room had stared at like it was a briefcase with a detonator inside, and began to speak. "I didn't come here to give a toast," he said, voice calm but firm, resonant in the way truth always is when it finally gets permission to exist in the open air. "I didn't come to celebrate what you think this day is about, or who you think this woman is. I came here because someone you all forgot once asked me to remember her. And I did. Every single day." There was no music playing in the background. No clinking of forks or polite coughs. Just 100 and something people staring at a man they hadn't seen in years and trying to rewrite everything they'd told themselves about the girl in white. He glanced at Lisa, briefly, intentionally, and continued. "I heard what you said earlier," he added, gaze never breaking from the crowd, about her being the last picked. I heard the laughter, too. That was a hell of a punchline, especially coming from people who've never bothered to ask who picked you. The silence cracked then, not with sound, but with shifting energy, the way a room leans and when something real is about to be said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the folder, its edges soft and slightly yellowed like it had been opened 100 times, and for the first time since he arrived, his voice softened. "She wrote me this," he said, holding up the paper with both hands. "Years ago, after her brother died. After you shut the door in my face and pretended like I didn't exist. I kept it, not because I'm sentimental, but because truth deserves to live somewhere." He unfolded the letter and began to read, his voice steady, but quieter now, like he was speaking just to me and the ghost of my brother sitting somewhere in the back row. "Dear Mason, I don't know how to make it through this. Everyone around me is crying, but no one's listening. They talk like he was perfect and pretend you were the problem. But you were the one who never left when things got ugly. You were the one who stayed. I wish they could see you the way he did. I wish they could see me too. Maybe someday someone will remind them that I was here, that I mattered. If you ever get out of this town, promise me one thing. Don't forget I was real. Love, A." He folded the letter slowly, with care, like returning a sacred thing to its resting place. And then he looked at all of them, not angry, not bitter, just clear. "She's not the last picked," he said, the words cutting clean and deep. "She just stopped playing your games." That was the moment the room cracked open like a wound. My mother, who hadn't shed a tear since the eulogy that ended with Mason being kicked out, started crying, not the quiet kind, but the kind you try to choke down and can't. Lisa's face froze into that tight-lipped, teeth-clenched mask she wore when she realized the joke was no longer funny. She stood up mid-sentence, heels clicking across the wood like gunshots, and stormed out without saying another word. People didn't know what to do. Some looked at me, waiting for me to respond. Others stared at Mason like he'd broken some sacred wedding etiquette. But he just handed the folder to Tim, patted his shoulder once like a silent baton pass, and walked toward the door with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had nothing left to prove. I didn't stop him. I didn't follow. I just stood still in the center of it all, surrounded by stunned silence and champagne and the soft unraveling of every false version of myself they'd ever constructed. And I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw my bouquet in a blaze of poetic revenge or scream about how they'd all been wrong about me. I just watched them. And when the night ended and the music started back up, a little too loud and a little too late, I turned to the nearest wall of windows and looked out at the darkened street where Mason had disappeared. "Let them sit with it," I whispered and walked away.